This is the third and final of our videos looking at the GCSE English examination. So we're now moving from the reading section of the exam to the writing section. Really important at this halfway point in the exam that we make sure that we allow enough time to tackle these questions properly. There's only 2 questions and it can be tempting to spend more time on section A, which of course has many more questions. The questions in section B are worth many more marks, and for question 5 you must allow 25 minutes, for question 6 you must allow 35 minutes, otherwise you won't be doing yourself justice. Question 5, the shorter writing task worth 16 marks, will always ask you to inform, explain or describe. Question 6 will always ask you to argue or persuade. It's a writing exam, or the writing section of an exam, so don't forget the basics. If you forget something as simple as paragraphing, it would be pretty devastating to your overall grade. If you stop using full stops, for example, and commas and colons and semicolons, really important if you're aiming for the top grades, that you're demonstrating to the examiner that you're absolutely in control of your writing, and it's not the writing that's in control of you. So really using the opportunity of these 2 writing tasks to show off to the examiner just how good your language skills are. And remember, that is what is being tested. Question 5, and it might be quite a dull question, a question asking you to explain, could be something straightforward as write a letter to your friend explaining why they should join you in a visit to a place which you think is very special. I think the real skill here, if you're aiming for the top grades for the A-star, is to take what might be quite a dull question and to produce a really vibrant, exciting piece of writing. So make it up. It doesn't have to be true. The writer of this article has never been to India, and yet she is able to write in a way that really does engage the audience. This writer uses humour at the beginning, and the references to the only way is Essex and some of the irony that she uses at the beginning really does engage the audience. Perhaps you're not someone who finds it easy to use humour or to use irony, particularly in an examination, but if we look later on at this extract, we can see that it really engages us with the detail of the descriptions. We really do want to read this to get to know India better. So this is a very successful piece of writing. It also maintains a very serious and a very formal tone throughout, and it sustains a consistent writing style from beginning to end. So a very successful piece of writing. And if we just remind ourselves of the marking scheme for band 4, it needs to be, and you can see there, to gain 8 to 10 marks, it needs to be convincing, it needs to be compelling. So look at how you will need to organise your ideas, look at the skills and the mark scheme that the examiner is asking for. Question 6, the last question. You've been in the exam hall by the end of this for 2¼ hours, and those last 35 minutes really are very important. By far the highest marks available for one question. So you need to really devote sufficient time and energies into this. I advise students to answer the questions in the order that they appear in the exam paper. Now I know not all teachers give that advice, but my reason is as follows. First of all, the examiner has put together the exam paper in this order quite deliberately as the way that they feel you're most likely to be successful. And I don't think we should go against that. But secondly, the writing questions, and particularly this writing question, question 6, may well be on a topic that you don't know a lot about, and you may well have to think of examples that you will want to use when you're writing to argue or to persuade. Very often, if not every time, the articles in section A, the 3 sources that you've just been writing about for 1 hour, will give you opportunity to select quotations and ideas from them that you can use in the writing task. So you can double up on your efforts. You've already gained all of your marks in section A about writing about those sources. Why not use those sources again when you're writing to argue or persuade. So if you're writing to argue or persuade, for example, let's say on global warming, you've been asked to write to a local newspaper on a subject like that, it may well be that one of the sources in section A gives you lots of facts and details about the environment that you would be able to use. It's almost always the case that there is a theme that runs through the exam paper that allows you to take ideas from section A to use in section B. So question 6 will ask you to perhaps write a speech, perhaps write a letter. If it asks you to argue, think of a debating speech. Think of a politician speaking. Writing to argue is straight to the point. It tells us that it's arguing, and your first sentence might well be, I'm writing to argue. If you're writing to persuade, think of an advertisement. The word persuade never appears in an advertisement, and yet we know that that's what it is doing. So you may be more rhetorical in writing to persuade. You may use much more poetic language in writing to persuade, and you may avoid using the word persuade altogether. If you're writing to argue or persuade, remember your job is to change someone's mind, to change the way someone thinks. And therefore, of all the writing that you do in this exam paper, it's the one that needs to be really quite powerful, really needs to be very convincing and compelling. So you may well use emotive language, very emotional words and vocabulary. So don't just use the first word that comes to mind. Think about what are the strongest words that you might use. You may use a high degree of rhetorical language, not just rhetorical questions, but also using language more associated with poetry. You may well use metaphors, you may well use allegory, you may well use similes and so on. So think about how you can really show off your full repertoire of language skills. So look at this piece of writing. The award-winning American journalist Marie Colvin famously appeared on CNN and said, and then we have a quotation which is very powerful, very compelling. To ignore the atrocities, look at that word, happening, and Hans says to ignore your conscience. To ignore your conscience is to ignore your humanity. Very rhetorical, great use of poetic language. But of course, this writer has used a quotation at the beginning of their writing to really present the compelling argument to us and to engage the reader. And then the language continues with the repetition of very emotive words, as you can see throughout on this very serious subject, annihilated the Syrian army regime and so on. Your son has lost an eye, there is no medicine. So depending on the subject, of course, think about how your language can be very powerful, compelling and engaging. Think about how you will organise your ideas and you can see what the mark scheme is asking for. I would recommend, if you're writing to argue, that you go for a fairly straightforward organisation, like in a debating speech where you will number your points. You might have 3 main points about the point that you're presenting, but also remember to have counter arguments. Some people might say, this is wrong because. If you're writing to persuade, you may have a more fluid structure. You may use much more repetition than you will in writing to argue. So remember the skills using complex grammatical structures and punctuation. Think about organising your writing and your sentences. Think about employing a variety of sentence forms to good effect. And as I was saying previously, take the writing questions as an opportunity to show off to the examiner the full range of writing skills that you have. Good luck.